again. It's story time. I'm all about the stories lately, and today I wanted to share with you a story from my own life that actually shaped who I am and my perspective on how the world works. If you're finding this video randomly, let me just say my name is Joanna DeVoe. I have been a creator on the internet since 2004. And I've had many different channels for creating online since that time. But one thing that has been consistent throughout it all is that I am the mother to one Tanner Golfball DeVoe, my kid. And this story that I want to tell you today is a story from our life together, my son and I. So I'm going to try to do this quickly because I could go on and ramble about this for a long time. But to make a long story short, when I was 18, I married my high school boyfriend. When I was 19, we moved to Hollywood so that I could become a movie star. I got pregnant right away in the first month, I think, within the first couple of months. And then shortly thereafter, I had my son the day after I turned 20. And I thought I was just going to have a baby and then go right back to pursuing my big Hollywood dreams. But it doesn't really work like that. It wasn't really like that. And right away, we realized, not right away, but soon after my son was born, in the early months of his life, we could tell there was something different about him. And as he got older, that became more and more pronounced. And by the time he was 3 years old, he was diagnosed with autism at a time when nobody knew anything about autism. There were no books on autism. There were no videos. There was no internet at that time. I wasn't on the internet at that time. I was gonna say, not how it is now. It probably existed in some computer nerd's garage, but it wasn't a thing at the time. And most doctors didn't even know much about it. It was something I always had to explain to other people. And shortly after that diagnosis, my very young husband split and I became a single mom, a poor single mom in Hollywood. And I continued to think that at any minute I was going to be able to go back to pursuing my dreams. But as life would have it, over time, and with much resistance and much fighting against what life was trying to show me, I did eventually come to see that my son was my new dream. It was so tricky because the way autism manifested for him, he couldn't speak. He showed very little emotion. He didn't hug me. He couldn't say, "I love you." He was really in his own world. And I was told many times that he would never speak, that he might not ever be potty trained or be able to hold a pencil or to have any kind of comprehension of like a TV show or a movie, to understand things in a linear way. I was just told a lot of what he will never do. And when he was 6 years old, I was told this vehemently, that he would never speak and never be potty trained. And at that point, he wasn't. It was very clear to see that he was extremely frustrated and he would hurt himself. He would, from when he was like a tiny little toddler, he would go up to furniture that had really sharp corners on it, and he would haul off and bang his head against it so hard that sometimes he'd have black eyes, but mostly he just had this big scab right here. And just as soon as it would heal and I would finally be relieved that it was gone, he would do it again. And it was just so frustrating. I could see that he was frustrated, but I didn't know how to help him. No one knew how to help us. And it just seemed like he was trapped in his own world of obsessing on balls. If you don't know, he goes by Tanner Golfball DeVoe. That is like his nickname because he has thousands and thousands of golf balls. He was almost born holding a golf ball. We have pictures of him when he was teeny tiny holding ping pong balls and golf balls. He's obsessed with balls. And he was then especially, and what he would spend hours doing every single day is sitting on our hardwood floors. This is very gross, but this is what happened. He would spit on the floor and then he would sit and bounce a golf ball in it. Now, the repetitive sound of a golf ball bouncing for hours on end is enough maybe to drive anybody up the wall. It certainly drove me up the wall. And it was just so confusing and bizarre to see him doing this all day long and not know how to connect. And I'm not sure what put this idea in my head, but previously, at some point, I had gone into his bedroom when he was sleeping, and just in wild desperation, I laid my hands on him and I did this super intense prayer that he would talk one day. Just the most emotional, energetically forceful prayer. Just everything I had just poured out of me into this prayer and through my hands onto my son. And then shortly thereafter, I got this idea. I don't know where I got the idea, but it was that I needed to enter into his world. And so what I did one day shocked the heck out of him in a very good way. I sat down on the floor next to him and I spit on the ground in the same way that he did. And when I did that, he stopped what he was doing. This is gonna make me cry. It's amazing that this is still emotional to me because it happened 24 years ago. He completely froze. He stopped what he was doing and looked up at me, and we connected, which was very unusual. He did not connect with people very often, much less smile. And he looked at me and he smiled, and we had this moment of connection. And then he let me have a golf ball, and I bounced the golf ball in the spit, and he was absolutely delighted. And we made friends in that moment, and we really connected, and we played together for a really long time. And then that summer, because I had entered into his world and somehow this broke the spell for him and we were able to connect in this really special way, we formed a relationship that I had always dreamed of having with my son, but spitting on the floor and bouncing the golf ball was the thing that unlocked it for us. And I was then able to pretend that he was an alien from another planet, and I was able to take him all around our apartment at first. We went out into the greater world to do this later, but at first it was just in our apartment, and I'd be like, water. I would turn the faucet on and be like, water. And he was so delighted to learn all of the words. And he did eventually start talking. And to this day, he is still learning new phrases and his comprehension is still developing all the time because he has developmental delays, but he for sure can talk. He's a very funny, very talkative guy. And when I think back to that prayer that night, with my hands on him, it makes me laugh because he doesn't stop talking now. It was like something was unlocked. But the piece that I really wanted to share with you that was so pivotal in my life was realizing that in order to invite him into my world, I first had to go into his world. I had to enter into his world. And I was still very, very immature at that time. My son and I definitely grew up. I'm still growing up. I'm always going to be growing up and learning and developing more wisdom because I'm inclined that way because I always want to do better and learn more. But that certainly put me on a trajectory and it allowed me to connect with other people in deeper ways because I realized if this is true of my son in this extreme condition, maybe it's true of other people, and it absolutely is. I'm not saying that every single person, if you try to enter into their world, you're going to make this amazing connection with them, but I will say many times you can, and that it's worth the effort. And it's very interesting to see the way people react when you enter into their world. And if you care about them, if you want to understand them, this is one way to do it. Ask them about themselves. Let them talk about themselves. Don't change the subject when they're talking about something you're not interested in. Get curious about that subject. ask them more about the thing that they're a super nerd about and let them go on about it. The last video I made was maybe my least popular video of all time because I was talking about going back home to see your family. And I know a lot of people dread that. A lot of people have a lot of resentment around their families. And the last thing they want to do is like let them go on and on about themselves. And it's not always advisable. Some people are so like up in their own world and their own ego that they're always expecting you to come into their world and they never repay the favor. But I have found that people really can surprise you, and people that you think are very rough or hard or closed off or whatever judgment it is you have on them, sometimes what's happening is they're just in their own world. They are just living their own story, and it's not a match to the story you're living. So you just aren't getting each other and you can't make a connection. And the reason I wanted to talk about that in terms of family is because those are the relationships that for many of us, not for everyone, but for many of us, those are the relationships that are going to mean the most to us when it's all said and done. Those are the relationships that we are going to rely on in hard times. Those are the relationships that formed who we are. So if it's at all possible to mend those fences or to create a deeper level of understanding, or to heal some old family patterns that just keep getting passed down through the generations, I think it is so worth it to be the bigger person, as they say, and get outside your own story and get into theirs for a moment so you can practice some deep listening, and so you can actually like enter into their world to the point where they might look up and be like, oh my gosh, you're here. You're here with me. There's such an intimacy to that. There's such a vulnerability to that. And if you are respectful and kind, and they can sense that you come in peace, you can have a really fun afternoon or evening or meal together. And it actually could have the potential to change your relationship going forward. And you never know what you might be unlocking or setting free in that person, because maybe all they were needing was somebody to actually see and acknowledge them for who they are instead of trying to change who they are, in order for them to relax and open up their scope a bit to the wider world beyond whatever boundaries of safety they have put up between themselves and the rest of the world. When the world is a scary place, when you have a lot of anxiety, if you've been hurt a lot, you tend to get closed off, and that can make you very prickly. And so other people don't want to deal with you, right? But it's kind of a miracle when someone has the grace or the mercy to make the attempt anyway, and to say you are worth it. You're worth listening to. You're worth seeing. You're worth acknowledging. And that's something that we can do for each other. And so if you think I'm a big old cornball, you would be right about that. I'm a very cheesy person, but also it comes from this deeper place and this desire to connect. I love to connect with people. I love people. I feel bad for us that we are so hurt and we have such a hard time connecting with each other, because that's so much of where our meaning comes from. It's so much of where our joy comes from, is our ability to connect and share our lives. So if there's anything I could pass through the computer to you this holiday season, it would be to consider stepping outside your own story for a minute and getting into someone else's, so that you can make a deeper connection with them and perhaps expand both your worlds at the same time. So that's it for today. Until we meet again, always remember, life is change, change is magic, magic is life, and the journey is the creation. Much love to you. Peace.